A famous actress
ready
was
for
cutting
this,
off her
Renata?
hair, not
Yes,
for a
let's
role,
do it.
not for a magazine.
All right,
She was sitting in a
here we
cheap
go.
barber chair in a part of Los
feels
Angeles
lighter
where nobody
already.
recognized her anymore, and she was watching 12 months of growth fall to the floor in long, dark ribbons. She did this every year. She had done it for 8 years straight. And the strange thing, the thing nobody knew, was where that hair went. It went into a brown envelope. It went to a charity, and from there it went onto the head of a sick young woman 3 counties away who had no idea whose hair she was wearing. The woman in the barber chair didn't know either. She never asked. That was the whole point. But here is the part that would have stopped her heart if she had known it that day. The sick young woman wearing her hair was the daughter of the one man on this earth who had quietly destroyed her career. The man who had erased her name. The man who had taken everything she'd worked 20 years to build and deleted it in a single afternoon, the way you delete a line in a spreadsheet you don't like. She had no idea. He had no idea. And the day the two of them finally learned the truth, in a small room with the lights too bright and nobody able to speak, would prove something this whole town had spent decades trying to forget. That dignity does not need the powerful to know your name. Think about that for a second. A man worth hundreds of millions of dollars. A man whose face had been on the cover of every business magazine in the country. A man who could greenlight a film with a single nod and end a career with a single email. And the only thing standing between his daughter and the worst version of her own reflection was a woman he had thrown away without ever bothering to remember her face. Stay with me all the way to the end, because the way this comes apart is something you are not going to see coming, and the last thing she says in that barber chair is going to sit with you long after this is over. Her name was Renata Vaughn, and 8 years ago, she was supposed to be a household name. Let me set the scene for you the way it actually happened, because the small details are the whole story. It was the second week of November. Outside, Los Angeles was doing its impression of autumn, which mostly means the light goes gold a little earlier in the day. Inside the barber shop on a side street in a working neighborhood, it smelled like talcum powder and warm towel. There was a radio playing low behind the counter. An old man waited in the second chair with a newspaper, and in the first chair sat a woman in a plain gray sweater. No jewelry, no entourage. Her phone face down in her lap, watching herself in a mirror that had a crack running across one corner. Nobody in that shop knew they were sitting 10 feet from a woman who used to get flown first class to film festivals on 3 continents. To them, she was just Renata. Regular. The lady who came in every November and asked for the same thing and tipped well and never said much. The barber draped the cape over her shoulders. He picked up the long, dark length of her hair in one hand, the way you'd lift something you respected. "You sure?" he asked. He asked every year. He already knew the answer. She looked at her reflection. She nodded. She didn't say a word. The scissors closed, and 12 months of growth came away in a single heavy ribbon and fell against the cape and slid to the floor. She had the contract. That's the part most people don't understand when they hear her story. She didn't just audition. She didn't just get close. She signed the lead role in a film called Titan Rising, a comic book picture with a budget bigger than the economy of a small country. The kind of role that doesn't just change a career, it changes a bloodline. She'd read the script 11 times. She'd done the costume fittings. She'd already started training 4 hours a day. Her son Dorian, 11 years old at the time, had told his whole class his mom was going to be a superhero. 3 weeks before the cameras rolled, she got an email. Subject line, creative realignment. 2 paragraphs, polite, bloodless. The studio had decided to move in a different direction with the character. They thanked her for her professionalism. They wished her the best in her future endeavors. That was it. No phone call. No meeting. An email at 6:40 on a Tuesday evening. The role went to a 26-year-old with long, shiny hair and not much else, an actress who tested better with the demographic the studio wanted to sell lunchboxes to. Renata was 40 at the time, and she'd made the mistake of being exactly the wrong age for the wrong men in the wrong room. She didn't sue. She didn't go to the press. People told her she should have, and maybe they were right. But here's something Hollywood does that no court can touch. They don't fire you. They don't blacklist you. They don't say a single bad word about you in public. They just stop remembering you exist. The calls slow down, then they stop. Your agent gets quieter on the phone. The auditions get smaller, then weirder, then gone. And the whole time everyone keeps smiling at you at parties and saying we have to work together soon, and soon never comes. And one day you realize soon was never a real word. It was just a way of saying goodbye without the courage to say it. That is a kind of cruelty that gets written off as the industry working normally. And it is worse than anything anyone could put in a contract. The man who sent that email, or rather the man whose decision that email represented, was named Walter Brandt, founder and chief executive of Brandt Pictures, a studio that controlled 3 of the biggest movie franchises in the country. Walter Brandt had built the whole thing from nothing, grew up poor in a flat stretch of Ohio, no connections, no money, nothing but an instinct for what people would pay to see and a complete absence of sentiment about how he got it. Here's the thing about Walter Brandt. He wasn't cruel the way villains are cruel in movies. He never raised his voice. He never schemed in a dark room. He was cruel the way a spreadsheet is cruel. When he cut Renata Vaughn from Titan Rising, he didn't hate her. He didn't think about her at all. To him, she was a row of numbers that didn't optimize. Name he glanced at for maybe 4 seconds before moving to the next line. He didn't even remember doing it. That's the truth of it. The thing that ended her career was, for him, a Tuesday he forgot by Wednesday. And that is exactly why what happens next matters so much. Subscribe and stay with me, because the universe was about to put these 2 people in the same room and neither of them would be ready for it. Let me tell you what Renata's life actually looked like 8 years later. She didn't go bankrupt. That's not this story. She wasn't living in a car. She had a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a decent place, clean, with good light in the afternoon. She kept working because that's who she was. TV movies, small parts in independent films nobody saw, voice work for animated shows, where her face didn't matter and her age didn't matter, and she could just be good at the Howard. One thing she'd always been good at, which was making you believe. She raised Dorian alone, put him through 4 years of college by saying yes to every single job she was offered, no matter how small, no matter how far below where she used to be. She never told him no. He never told him she was tired, and she never, not once, told him about that email. Some nights, when the apartment was quiet and Dorian was asleep down the hall, she would open her laptop and find the old message. The one from 2015. The one that still said in a folder she never emptied, Titan Rising, contract confirmation, Renata Vaughn. She wouldn't reply to it. She couldn't, it was 8 years dead. She would just read it, read proof that for one moment it had all been real. Then she'd close the laptop and go to bed. She never deleted it. She never told a soul she still had it. There are some kinds of grief you don't let anybody else hold, because if they hold it, they might drop it. And there's a version of this story where she becomes bitter, where she spends every audition mourning the one that got away, where she lets the email at 6:40 on a Tuesday rot something inside her until there's nothing left but the rot. Plenty of people would have. Plenty of people did. People she'd come up with, people just as talented, who let the industry's forgetting become their own. She watched it happen to friends, the slow souring, the way the disappointment crept into their eyes and never left. She didn't go that way. Not because she didn't feel it. She felt it every single day, every time she saw a billboard for a movie she should have been in, every time a younger actress thanked her in an interview as an inspiration, without knowing she was talking to a ghost. She felt all of it. She just refused to let it be the last word, and every November she cut off her hair. It started in 2016, the year after the email. A close friend of hers had lost a child to cancer, a boy 9 years old, and at the funeral Renata saw a photograph from his last months. He was wearing a cheap wig, the synthetic kind. Stiff plastic strands, the color slightly wrong, the whole thing sitting on his head like a toy somebody had bought at a costume shop. And something in Renata broke loose looking at that picture. She thought, this child spent his last year of life wearing something that looked like a Halloween prop because real hair costs thousands of dollars and nobody gave it to him. She had real hair, good hair, hair that an entire team of stylists used to get paid a fortune every year to maintain. Because in her business hair was money, hair was brand, Hair was the thing the camera loved before it loved your face. And she thought, if my hair could replace that plastic thing on a child's head, then I have no reason on God's earth to keep it. So every November she grew it out, 12 full months, and then she cut it all off and mailed it to a charity called Hope in Strands. She signed the donation card with a fake name, R. Carver, not because she was ashamed. Because the moment her real name was on it, it stopped being a gift and started being a press release. And she'd spent enough of her life having her kindness turned into someone else's marketing. Hope in Strands needs at least 10 inches of hair to make a wig. Renata's donations were usually 14, enough for one complete wig, one real wig, for one real person. The organization has a waiting list that runs into the hundreds. Most of them are young women. She never knew where her hair went. She never asked. She just grew it, cut it, mailed it, and started again. For 8 years, that was the rhythm of it, and she had no idea, none, that one of those wigs had ended up exactly where it would matter most. Now I have to take you somewhere else. Up to the 34th floor of a glass tower in Century City. Into the corner office of Walter Brandt. It was an ordinary Thursday. His assistant brought him the weekend numbers for the latest Titan sequel. $340 million in the opening week. Walter looked at the figure, nodded once, and said nothing. That was the entire range of his reaction. He'd seen the number before it existed. The number was never a surprise. Money on that scale had stopped meaning anything to him years ago. It was just the score, and he always won. Then his phone rang. His ex-wife, Diana. They hadn't spoken in months, and they didn't call each other for nothing. He picked up. And the moment he heard her voice, the floor shifted under him, though his face didn't move at all. Their daughter, Margaret, 21 years old, had been to the doctor that morning. The biopsy was back. Breast cancer, stage 2, at 21. Walter Brandt had spent his entire adult life solving problems by writing checks. There was nothing in his world that money couldn't make move, and he sat in that 34th floor office with the whole city laid out beneath him, and he understood for the first time that he was about to face a thing he could not buy, could not negotiate, could not realign. He didn't know who to pay, and not knowing who to pay was the most lost he had ever felt in his life. He went to the hospital that afternoon, first time visiting his daughter as a patient. He bought flowers at the gift shop on the ground floor, the nice ones, wrapped in paper. When he walked into her room, she was looking out the window. The chemo hadn't started yet, but the fear had. And the moment she heard the door, she pulled the blanket up to her chin. A reflex. Like she was hiding. He stood in the doorway holding flowers that suddenly seemed like the stupidest object in the world. And for 6 full seconds, neither of them said a thing. Margaret started chemotherapy the following week. Her hair began to fall out within days. By the 3rd week, it was gone, all of it, and a young woman who'd had long, dark hair her whole life looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, a sick stranger, somebody who looked exactly like what she was most afraid of becoming. Here is what nobody tells you about losing your hair to cancer when you're young. For a child, it's sad. For a young woman of 21, it's something else. It's the loss of the face you were going to grow into. Loss of every imagined future where you were healthy and ordinary and loved. Hair, at that age, is tangled up with everything. With being a woman, with being seen, with being wanted. Losing it isn't vanity. It's the body announcing the thing your mind is trying not to believe. Then a package arrived from Hope in Strands. A nurse brought it in. Margaret opened it alone. Inside was a wig, real hair. Dark, soft, the color almost exactly her own. Not the stiff plastic thing she'd been dreading. She held it for a long moment. Then she put it on in front of the small mirror on her bedside table, and she sat very still, and something in her chest loosened for the first time in weeks. The next day, when Walter came to visit, Margaret was wearing the wig. And when Walter saw his daughter looking, for one moment, like herself again, he let out a breath he'd been holding for 3 weeks. He didn't understand why it mattered so much. He just knew it did. And from that day on, Margaret wore the wig every single time her father came into the room. Not because she was cold, not because she was ashamed, because she could not stand for him to see her looking like she was dying. The wig was armor. It was the only thing that let her walk out of that hospital room into the world without people looking at her with those soft, terrible, pitying eyes. Walter, every time he saw it, felt that same selfish flood of relief, because the wig let him not look at the truth either. The two of them, father and daughter, lying to each other gently, every single day, with a head of someone else's hair. You should understand what kind of father Walter Brandt was. He was a good father, the way a vault is a good place to keep money. He was always there when there was a check to write. Tuition, cars, the best doctors, the best hospital room, a private suite with a view of the hills. Whatever could be paid for, he paid for instantly and without being asked. What he could not do, had never once managed to do in 21 years, was sit down in a chair beside his daughter and simply stay. Be in the fear with her. Let the silence be uncomfortable and not reach for his phone. He loved her completely, and he had no idea how to be with her, and the wig, in a strange way, was a mercy to them both. It let him keep visiting a daughter who looked like she was going to be fine, instead of facing a daughter who might not be. People think donating hair is a small thing. It is not. For an actress, hair is the tool of the trade. It's the brand. It's the thing a whole salaried team is paid to protect, because the camera falls in love with it before it ever reaches your eyes. Cutting it off is not a small act. It's a deliberate choice to give away the exact thing your profession demands you keep. And Renata Vaughn had been making that choice in secret for 8 years. Now stay with me, because the lines of this story are about to cross, and once they cross, there is no going back. Renata's son, Dorian, 24 now and fresh out of school, called her one evening with news. He'd been accepted into a development training program, an entry-level executive position, at Brandt Pictures. Renata went silent on the line. 4 full seconds. Then she said, "Why would you turn that down?" Because part of her, the part she never let anyone see, knew exactly whose company that was. Knew that her son's career was about to be shaped by the same man who had ended hers. And she didn't know if this was a test from the universe, or a reward, or just a piece of cruelty so perfectly designed it could only have come from the kind of God who has a dark sense of humor. She didn't stop him. She wouldn't do that to him. Wouldn't let her old wound become his closed door. But she didn't tell him about 2015 either. She never had. She just said congratulations. And she meant it, and she hung up and sat alone in the quiet with the weight of it. When Renata was 9 years old, growing up in a hard part of the city, her mother used to do hair for the neighborhood women out of their kitchen. $15 a session. Renata would sit and watch every evening. And her mother used to say something Renata never forgot, even though she'd forgotten almost everything else about that woman. She said, "Hair is the first thing people see before they ever see your face. Doing someone's hair right gives them 5 extra seconds of feeling good before the world gets its chance to judge them." 5 seconds. That was the whole philosophy. Renata didn't remember her mother's voice anymore, but she remembered that. A few weeks into Dorian's new job, an envelope came to Renata's own mailbox, not from the studio, from Hope in Strands. The charity held an annual event. They called it Hair for Hope. Once a year, they invited a small number of their most significant donors to meet, in person, some of the patients who'd received their wigs. It was always voluntary, always anonymous until the very last moment. Donor and recipient never knew each other's names until both had agreed to meet face to face. And R. Carver, the donor with 8 unbroken years of giving, had been specially invited. Renata read the letter. She folded it. She set it on the kitchen table. She went to bed, and the next morning she got up and read it again. And then she did something she had never done in 8 years of giving. She said yes. Hope in Strands was founded decades ago, and in all that time they've received millions of donations of hair from every corner of the country. But hair that's actually good enough to make a full wig, real, unprocessed, at least 10 inches long, makes up only about 1 in 5 donations. The rest gets sold to cover costs. A full wig made from real human hair sells on the open market for thousands of dollars. The patients receive theirs for free. Renata had given one of those rare, complete, perfect donations every November for 8 years. She had no idea that one of them was about to walk into the same room as her. The day of the event, Renata dressed plainly. No makeup to speak of, nothing that would make anyone look twice. She didn't want to be recognized as Renata Vaughn, the actress. She wanted to be R. Carver, the donor, nobody, which after 8 years was a name that fit her more comfortably than her own. They brought her into a small meeting room. The patient was already there, a young woman, 21, maybe. Dark hair, soft and real, framing a face that was thin from treatment but bright, alive, fighting. The coordinator smiled and said, "This is the young lady who's been wearing your gift for the past 2 years." Renata looked at her, and the coordinator said, Margaret Brandt. Renata went completely still. Brandt. The girl didn't know who Renata was. She just looked at the woman in front of her and smiled the way sick people smile, real, but tired underneath, and she said, "Thank you. I wear this every single day." She hesitated, then added something quietly, almost to herself. "You know, every time I touch it. I don't even know why. I think it's because I know it came from somebody real. Somebody who must have lost something themselves once. Otherwise, why would you grow your hair for a whole year just to give it to a stranger?" Renata looked at the hair on the girl's head, her own hair, cut off in a barber chair in November 2 years ago. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. And in that exact moment, the door of the room opened. Walter Brandt walked in. He'd come to take his daughter home. He saw the woman standing across from Margaret, and he stopped. He recognized Renata first. It took him less than a second. Renata recognized him a heartbeat later. Margaret looked from one of them to the other, not understanding why the air in the room had suddenly gone so heavy, why 2 grown adults were standing there like the floor had dropped out from under both of them. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent light overhead. Walter Brandt, a man who had never once in his life been caught off guard in a room, stood frozen in a doorway, holding the truth he hadn't earned and couldn't put down. The woman he'd erased 8 years ago had been the one keeping his daughter whole. He found Renata alone in the hospital corridor a little later. Margaret was getting her things together. Walter came up beside her, and for the first time in his life, the words didn't come out smooth. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear to you, I had no idea it was you." Renata looked at him. Her voice was flat and calm. "I know you didn't know. That's exactly the problem." He stopped. "You didn't need to know my name to decide I wasn't worth keeping," she said. "And I didn't need you to know my name to keep your daughter alive. That right there is the difference between you and me, Mr. Brandt." He tried again. "There has to be something I can do. Let me." And here is where most people would have asked for something. A check. An apology in writing. A role. A second chance. 8 years of a stolen career, and the man who stole it was standing right there, cornered, willing to pay anything to make the feeling go away. Anybody would have understood if she'd named a price. There's nothing to do. She didn't say it cruelly. She said it plainly, which was worse. Your daughter is getting better. That's the only thing in that room that matters. Don't turn this into a story about you. Walter Brandt had spent 40 years turning everything into a story about him, and standing in that hallway he found, for the first time, that he had nothing to write a check for, no one to call, no problem to realign. The thing in front of him couldn't be fixed with anything he owned. It could only be felt, and he had spent so long not feeling things that he'd forgotten how it was done. People love to say forgiveness is something you do for yourself. Renata didn't forgive Walter Brandt. She did not forget the email at 6:40 on a Tuesday. She did not erase 8 years of stopped phone calls and shrinking rooms. But she refused to let the man who took her future also take the 8 years that came after it. That's not forgiveness. It's something harder to name, and far less pretty, and a great deal more real. It's the decision to keep being yourself when the world has decided you're nobody. Later, when it was just the two of them, Margaret asked her quietly, "Is there something between you and my dad?" Renata looked at the 21-year-old in front of her, wearing her hair. "Yes," she said, "but it's between me and your father. It has nothing to do with you." Margaret nodded. She was quiet a while. Then she asked, 8 years. Did you ever think about stopping?" Renata thought about telling her the easy answer. She told her the true one instead. "Yes, the 4th year. I cut it all off, and then I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried. I didn't know why I was doing it anymore. Didn't know who got it. Didn't know if it meant anything. So why didn't you stop?" Renata almost smiled, because by then it had already started growing back. Now here is what happened to Walter Brandt, because this is the part you've been waiting for, and it matters. He didn't get away with it, not in the way the powerful usually do. It started small. He couldn't sleep. A man who'd never lost a night's rest over a single decision in his life, doing the math on every name he'd ever crossed off. Every name he'd ever crossed? A list with 4 seconds of attention. He started pulling old files. He found the email. The actual email. Creative realignment. He read his own words back, the polite, bloodless paragraphs, and for the first time he read them the way she must have read them, at 6:40 on a Tuesday. With an 11-year-old son down the hall who'd told his whole class his mother was going to be a hero. He went looking for how many others there had been. He thought there'd be a few. There were dozens. Page after page of people he'd realigned, optimized, moved past. Names attached to whole lives he'd never once considered. Actors who'd had one bad test screening. Directors who'd asked one too many questions. Writers who'd been a little too old, a little too honest, a little too inconvenient to keep around. And he understood, slowly and then all at once, that he had spent his entire career being the email, the thing that arrived in the evening and ended everything by morning. He pulled one file in particular, Renata's. He wanted to see what the actual reason had been, the real one, the one underneath the polite language. He found the internal notes from 2015, and there it was, in a marketing executive's shorthand, the truth he'd signed off on without reading closely. 3 words about a 40-year-old woman with 20 years of craft. Doesn't move product. That was it. That was the whole verdict. Doesn't move product. He had ended a person over a phrase you'd use about a breakfast cereal. He sat with that for a long time. The board of Brandt Pictures had been circling him for 2 years. His instincts, the very instincts that built the company, had been calcifying into the same 3 franchises, run the same 3 ways, and the industry had started to move without him. When the casting practices at his studio came under public scrutiny, a pattern of older performers and performers of color quietly removed from projects late in the process, the board had everything they needed. They asked for his resignation. He gave it. Not in a blaze, in a memo, a polite, bloodless memo, 2 paragraphs, the irony of which was not lost on him for a single second. The man who erased people for a living was, in the end, erased by the same machine he'd built. And the worst part, the part that actually broke him, was that he finally understood it from the inside. He finally knew what it felt like to become a row in someone else's spreadsheet. But that's not the end of his story, and it shouldn't be, because punishment without understanding is just noise. The thing that actually changed him wasn't losing the company. It was his daughter. Margaret got better. The treatment worked. Her hair grew back, slow and thin at first, then her own again. And one evening, months into her recovery, sitting at dinner with her father, she told him she wanted to do something with her life that mattered. She wanted to work with Hope in Strands. She wanted to help the next young woman get the wig that had carried her through the worst year of her life. And Walter Brandt, former Titan, erased man, looked at his daughter and realized that the woman he had thrown away 8 years ago had not only kept his child alive, she had given her something to live for. He had spent 4 seconds destroying Renata Vaughn. Renata Vaughn had spent 8 years, without ever knowing it, saving the one thing he loved most in the world. He never tried to buy his way back into her good graces. He understood, finally, that there was no check large enough, and that offering one would only insult the thing she'd done. Instead, he did the one thing he'd never done for anyone. He used what was left of his name, on his way out the door, to fund the charity. Anonymously. Our Carver's gift had been anonymous for 8 years. Walter Brandt made his the same way. Because some lessons you only learn by being taught them by the person you wronged. And the lesson was this: you don't put your name on the good you do. The good is the point. The name is just vanity wearing a costume. 6 months later, it was November again. Renata Vaughn sat in the same cheap barber chair, in the same neighborhood where nobody recognized her, the vinyl still cracked on the same armrest, same barber, nobody knew. Her hair was 14 inches long, long enough. Her phone buzzed in her bag. Dorian. She looked at the screen and she let it ring. She'd call him back. The barber caught her eye in the mirror. Same as every year? Renata slid the phone into her pocket. She looked at herself in the glass, not at her hair, at her eyes. Calm, the way a person is calm when they've decided long ago what matters and stopped needing anybody else to agree. Same as every year, she said. The scissors opened, the sound of the first cut. This time she didn't watch the hair fall. She didn't need to. She kept her eyes on the woman in the mirror, the one no Cito you remembered, the one a whole town had decided to forget, the one who had quietly, for 9 years now, been the reason a stranger got to keep going. She thought, just for a second, about Walter Brandt, about the email at 6:40 on a Tuesday, about the empty office on the 34th floor that belonged to someone else now. She did not feel triumph. She had expected to all those years in the dark fantasies everyone has about the people who hurt them. But triumph never came. What came instead was something quieter and much larger. The understanding that he had spent his whole life trying to be remembered, and she had spent hers learning that the best things you do are the ones nobody ever signs. The brown envelope, the address for Hope in Strands, the label she'd printed at home. He signed the card, R. Carver, and that was the 9th time. She paid the barber. She tipped him the way she always did. She stepped out onto the sidewalk into that early gold November light, ran a hand once over the short bristle of what was left of her hair, and walked to her car like a woman with nowhere important to be and nothing left to prove. Somewhere across the city, a young woman she would probably never see again was alive and growing how to give the next one a back, and nobody knew but him. Anywhere knew her name. That was the whole point.